The Trump administration's America First policy sent shockwaves through Europe, reverberating across capitals and boardrooms alike. For decades, the transatlantic alliance had been a pillar of stability, but now uncertainty was spreading fast. The foundation of a decades-old alliance was suddenly shaken, leaving diplomats and leaders scrambling to adapt to a rapidly changing reality. Tariffs on European goods and open questioning of NATO commitments signaled a fundamental shift in the relationship, raising doubts about the future of shared security and economic cooperation. Europe, long reliant on American security and prosperity, suddenly faced a new era of uncertainty. The old assumptions no longer held, and the continent was forced to confront its vulnerabilities. European leaders began to talk seriously about strategic autonomy, a dramatic departure from the post-Cold War era and a concept that had once seemed almost unthinkable. The financial crisis, China's rise as a global power, and unpredictable U.S. foreign policy deepened Europe's unease. Each event underscored the risks of overdependence on a single ally. The idea that America would always have Europe's back was fading, replaced by a growing sense that Europe needed to take more responsibility for its own future. Withdrawal from international agreements and a transactional approach to diplomacy forced Europe to reconsider its dependence, prompting difficult conversations about sovereignty and self-reliance. Now, the debate isn't if Europe should be more independent, but how. The question has shifted from possibility to practicality, and the search for solutions is underway. Untangling deep economic, military, and cultural ties is complex, but political will is growing. Leaders are exploring new defense initiatives, trade agreements, and diplomatic strategies. Leaders are openly discussing a Europe that stands on its own, making decisions and defending interests without U.S. approval. The conversation is no longer taboo. It's a central part of the European agenda. This isn't about turning against America, but about creating a more balanced partnership, one where Europe is an equal player, not just a junior partner. The goal is clear, a Europe that acts decisively for its own interests, whether or not the U.S. agrees. It's about having the confidence and capacity to shape its own destiny. The journey is long, and the challenges are many, but recent events have shown it's necessary. From Brexit to the pandemic, the world is changing fast, and Europe must adapt. The era of relying solely on a transatlantic big brother is ending. A new chapter is beginning, one defined by European initiative and resilience. Europe is preparing to chart its own course, confident, united, and ready to face the future on its own terms. The EU-US economic relationship is vast, spanning not just trade in goods but also services, investments, and technology. It's one of the largest and most complex economic partnerships in the world, shaping global commerce and standards. Every day, billions in goods and services cross the Atlantic, fueling industries and supporting millions of jobs. From cars and machinery to pharmaceuticals and digital services, the flow is constant and essential. American and European companies are deeply intertwined, investing in each other's economies and creating prosperity on both sides. This partnership has fostered innovation, growth, and stability for decades. But this integration has also bred a certain dependency, especially with the US dollar's dominance in global finance. Many European transactions rely on the dollar, making Europe vulnerable to US policy shifts. US sanctions force European companies to comply, even when these actions conflict with EU policy, limiting Europe's economic sovereignty and ability to act independently on the world stage. Tariffs on European steel and aluminum expose the vulnerability of relying on US goodwill, highlighting how quickly trade relations can become strained. As a result, many Europeans now question the reliability of the US as a long-term trade partner, sparking debates about the future direction of EU trade policy. The push isn't to end trade, but to rebalance it, reduce strategic liabilities, and ensure Europe's interests are protected in a changing world. Europe wants an economic system less tied to Washington's political whims, seeking more control over its own financial and trade decisions. The aim: resilience, autonomy, and protection of European interests, while still benefiting from open markets and cooperation. The challenge is to achieve this balance without losing the immense benefits of transatlantic cooperation, which has brought peace and prosperity for generations. Ultimately, Europe seeks a partnership of equals, one built on mutual respect and shared goals, not dependence. To reduce dependence, Europe must strengthen its internal market. Export-led growth, especially in Germany, has made the EU vulnerable to shocks from the US and China. Boosting domestic demand through infrastructure investment, higher wages, and better social safety nets can create a self-sustaining growth engine. When Europeans spend more at home, the economy becomes more resilient. A strong internal market of 450 million consumers is a powerful asset. This shift doesn't mean abandoning trade, but balancing it. Unlocking domestic potential makes Europe less susceptible to external shocks. It's a key step toward genuine economic autonomy. Europe must look beyond the US and China to reduce strategic risk. Diversifying trade partners is about adding new relationships, not replacing old ones. The EU has signed deals with Japan, Canada, and Vietnam, promoting high standards and spreading its regulatory influence. Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia offer vast opportunities for mutually beneficial partnerships. Investing in these regions builds resilience and influence. A unified European trade policy is essential. Member states must act together. Building trust and deep ties takes time, but it's necessary. By spreading economic bets globally, Europe secures its prosperity. Diversification is central to mastering its own economic destiny. Europe's fragmented financial markets are a major weakness. Unlike the US, Europe lacks a unified capital market, making it hard for businesses to access funding. The Capital Markets Union aims to break down barriers and create a single market for capital. This would fuel innovation, strengthen the euro, and reduce vulnerability to US financial pressure. Building the CMU requires harmonizing complex rules and political will. Progress is slow, but the strategic need is clear. Without it, Europe remains financially dependent. A true capital markets union is essential for sovereignty. For over 70 years, Europe relied on the US for security through NATO. This allowed Europe to focus on rebuilding, but led to chronic underinvestment in defense. US support provided high-end capabilities, leaving European armies hollowed out. Recent US statements questioning NATO's core commitments exposed Europe's vulnerability. Europe can no longer take American protection for granted. The push for strategic autonomy and defense is now urgent. It's not about abandoning NATO, but building a stronger European pillar within it. Europe must develop the capacity to act independently, especially in its neighborhood. The goal: become a producer, not just a consumer, of security. Greater responsibility and capability are now essential. The war in Ukraine has forced Europe to confront its military shortcomings, exposing vulnerabilities that had long been overlooked. The conflict has made it clear that peace cannot be taken for granted, and that Europe must be prepared to defend itself and its neighbors. While Europe has united to support Kyiv with humanitarian and military aid, much of the most critical assistance, especially advanced weaponry and ammunition, has come from the United States, highlighting Europe's dependence on American support. Europe must now ramp up its own defense production, ammunition, tanks, air defense systems, so it can stand on its own, without relying so heavily on American stockpiles or external suppliers. Joint procurement and investment in European defense industries are underway, but these efforts need to accelerate rapidly to meet the scale of the challenge. Defense spending must rise significantly and be carefully coordinated among nations to avoid duplication, inefficiency, and wasteful competition. Pooling resources and launching common projects not only creates economies of scale, but also improves interoperability between European forces, making them more effective together. Strengthening defense isn't just about acquiring new hardware. It's about improving readiness, logistics, and conducting regular joint exercises to ensure forces can operate seamlessly. Rebuilding military capacity is a massive and complex task, requiring sustained effort and investment. But the cost of being unprepared in the face of threats is far higher. The Ukraine war is a wake-up call, reminding Europe that credible defense is essential for security and stability in the region. Europe must invest now, with determination and unity, to secure its future and protect the values it stands for. Europe's reliance on US military technology undermines its strategic autonomy. Buying American means long-term dependence on US suppliers and political approval. This drains European defense budgets and stifles local innovation. To act independently, Europe needs control over its own military capabilities. A Buy European approach is key, supporting joint projects like the Future Combat Air System. This requires coordination and trust among member states. It's politically tough, but essential for a self-sufficient defense industry. Breaking the cycle of dependence is vital for sovereignty. Achieving autonomy demands changes in how the EU operates. Consensus-based decision-making often leads to paralysis, especially in foreign policy. Moving toward qualified majority voting would allow faster, more decisive action. Balancing national interests with collective effectiveness is crucial. Europe must also counter foreign influence, especially from US tech giants. Stronger regulation, like the Digital Services Act, protects democratic processes. Strategic autonomy requires economic resilience, security responsibility, and political reform. This isn't anti-Americanism. It's about a stronger, more sovereign Europe. Europe aims to be a true partner and a pole of stability in a changing world.